Good evening,
Hello,
JR.
Phil.
How
What's
you
up, man?
doing? Christmas season,
Yeah.
Christmas Day's come and gone.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Jay, we're looking in session 5 of this study, and we're looking at how we worship, looking forward in worship. I think most Christians agree that worship's important. If they can work it in their schedules.
Yeah.
Sometimes those schedules get in the way of joining together with fellow believers, don't they?
Is it as important to us as the folks we're going to be studying about today?
I
Was
don't
to
think
them?
it was.
I
I
don't
don't
either,
think it
Phil.
was.
I don't think it is either.
But weekly worship with others, or your private study.
Yeah.
We talk about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Our prayer time and worship time. That's something we have to treat not as an option, but as I find myself having to make a place. Here's what I'm gonna do. This I'm gonna have to get up half hour earlier, but this is what I'll do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that way for a lot of people, a lot of busy people. In this study we'll look at today, we're looking at the wise men from the East, and they had probably some pretty hectic schedules.
Yes,
too.
they did. Yeah.
But yet they took time out, and they followed a star. And it doesn't say if they were astrologers, astronomers, or whatever, but you have to think that they were knowledgeable people to have been called wise men from the East. But their example underscores how important it was to them. Now, that wasn't going to be their king.
No.
They thought they were going to visit a Jewish king from Israel. They had no idea who they were going to visit. A lot of international scholars traveling a great distance to tell Herod of the birth of the Messiah. His people in house, they confirmed, well, this kid's going to be born in Bethlehem. So Herod knew about as much as anyone about this child, which wasn't much. And these magi come, and they find out that this is a unique situation. The truth of Christmas can slip away when we focus on things that aren't about the birth of the Savior. And Herod, he didn't care anything about the Jews. He may have been part Jew. Some people say that he was.
You're right.
But he cared absolutely nothing about it. All he cared about was staying in power.
Killing whoever was going to try to take his throne.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to do.
But these wise men, they saw something that they thought they had needed to pursue, and they did it. We spend time and money on things that don't last. Sometimes we spend money on things that are harmful to us.
Yeah.
Jesus is worthy of our worship. The time that we spend with him is going to benefit us. It benefits us in the long run. And worship isn't just about going to church. It's about living for Jesus.
More than sitting in a pew, isn't it?
Yeah. And Matthew does a good job bringing that out. So we're going to be looking in the 2nd chapter of Matthew, a couple of different passages. So let's take a look at them.
Yeah, we're looking at chapter 2, verses 1 through 6 to start with. Matthew writes, as after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Messiah would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judea, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Phil, we heard Jacob talk Sunday. He went through the lesson in Luke's words, and he talked about, he tied it back into history, talking about King Herod and all those different things in history, and here Matthew's doing the same thing. So it was important for the New Testament writers to tie the stories that happened about Christ in the New Testament back to their time when they were first written about, some of them 700-800 years before in the Old Testament.
Yeah, chronological accuracy.
Exactly.
And I think it's what they tried to achieve.
Yep. Making sure people understand that this actually did happen in this point in time in history is when it happened. And so Matthew, first thing he does, he calls out the fact it was during that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the days of King Herod.
Yeah, and in the days of Herod. And that's a lot how they determined time.
Yeah.
Was, well, you remember back when Nixon was in power.
Yeah.
Okay, the Nixon era, or the Eisenhower era. And this is kind of the way they looked at their leaders and their regime, and that was how they would remember the time a lot of times.
And history will tell us that Herod was made king of Judah in 37 BC. And we also know that he died in 4 BC. So that's his period of reign from 37 down to 4 BC. So we know that Christ was born sometime during that, and we're going to narrow it down even further than that by the time we get done with the verses today. Now, Herod was best known for his ruthlessness, his paranoid, and his political tactics. In fact, it's rumored that he killed his wife, had his wife killed, and maybe some of his sons too. But anybody that got in the way of his leadership, of his kingdom, his throne, he would have him killed. Didn't bother him at all to do that. So that's what he was known as. And it says wise men from the east. Now, we call them the 3 wise men. We don't know how many there were, Phil. That's probably tied into the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the 3 gifts that were brought. It could have been a dozen of them. It could have been 2. We don't know how many it was. Yeah. But as you said, they were very learned people. They were wise. They might have been astronomers and astrologers and things like that. We know that they saw signs in the sky. We also know the shepherds saw signs in the sky. And the shepherds weren't wise men, but God revealed something to them he didn't reveal to anybody else. Yeah. And what they came from an area probably Iran today, or maybe even a little bit further east than that. So it wasn't a short journey. Yeah. It was a long journey, and you don't go straight across that territory. You have to go up the Fertile Crescent and back down by the Mediterranean Sea. So it took months to get there, and probably between 500 and 1,000 miles the way they had to travel. They traveled to Jerusalem. Now they went to Jerusalem because they had probably heard maybe even from some Jewish people that had been to Babylon, lived in Babylon. A lot of the Jews stayed there whenever they were allowed to go back into Israel. They just stayed there. They already had businesses. They already had their families there. And they probably heard some of the stories about this Messiah that was to be born. And they had an idea that the place to find out about that, besides following the star, was in the capital city of Israel, which was Jerusalem. That's where they came back to. And they started asking around, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? Now, they made that known that he was going to be born as a king, not something that was given to him. He earned that right by being of the house of David, of the city of David. And that's what we know that Jesus, that's where his line was through the line of David several hundred years before. And we said we saw his star at its rising. It doesn't tell us what that is, Phil, but it almost reads to me like a new star appeared at its rising when it first became visible.
And I think the scholars agree with it, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, because it was something different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know, as we talked about last week about the shepherds, were they the only ones that could see the star over the manger, over the place they were staying, or could everybody around them see it? I think it was just made visible to those people, and in this case it was made visible to just those wise men. God can do that. He can open their eyes to see things that none of the rest of us could see. And he said, we've seen his star, and we want to come and worship him. Now, the writer talks about 3 different definitions of worship. One of them could be showing a differential respect, showing respect to somebody for their position. One could be an attitude of complete submission to someone because of their in authority.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one would be just the act of worship itself, where you come in and sing praises to God and worship him for who he is. That's the 3 verses, three different types of words for worship. And we don't know what it was, which one of those it was, but we know whatever it was, that they felt this feeling about worshiping this new king so strongly. As you said, they left their positions and traveled 500, 750 miles, whatever, over a several months period of time to see a baby, to see a king that had been born when they believed probably when the star first appeared, that's when he had been born. That's a strong urging, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Now, we feel that we feel an urge to get up here, to get up on Sunday morning to come to worship, don't we?
Sure.
And if we miss it, it's not the feeling doesn't come back until we go the next time.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't do that because a lot of people are not regular attenders, and they don't feel that urging. But I, as I said, I'm not sure we would get up and fly across the United States. Forget walking, just fly across the United States to go to a worship service. You know, we don't feel that urge that they felt so strongly that they got on their camels with their entourage of people, which I'm sure was more than just those 2 or 3 or whatever, however many it was, and ride all those months and all those miles to see Jesus. It was a great feeling it was a great urging that they had. Now, Herod heard all this, and it says he was deeply disturbed, and it makes a statement after that, all of Jerusalem with him.
Well, there were a
was.
lot of people in Jerusalem that would have argued that Herod was already deeply disturbed.
Yeah, exactly.
Before he ever heard about this.
But then when you saw on the fact that there's a new king in the country somewhere,
yeah.
they didn't know what was going to happen. And we see later on what actually did happen, but they knew that it was not going to be easy treading on the water with Herod upset because his king had been born. So he asked the scribes and the Pharisees, the priests and the scribes, what it says. We know who they were, of course. They were the priests, which was mostly the Sadducees, and then there were the scribes, which a lot of them were Pharisees. But the scribes, of course, knew the Bible backwards and forward, or the scrolls. They would have known exactly what it said about the Messiah, when he was going to be born and where and so forth. So Herod did know enough about the Jewish faith to know who to talk to. And he went to those and asked them, where is the Messiah going to be born? Now, I thought it was interesting that he didn't say, where's the king going to be born? He wouldn't go anywhere near saying Jesus, that this child was born was going to be a king. Right. He said, where's the Messiah going to be born? He didn't say, where's the king is going to be born? He made sure he didn't admit that somebody could take over his throne. He said, where's he going to be born? And they answered him, of course, like the Jeremiah and Micah, we both have some words about that. He was born in Bethlehem of Judea, which was about 5 or 6 miles south of Jerusalem, southeast, I believe it was, of Jerusalem. City of David. He was from the line of David, and we know that's what the Bible tells us back in the Old Testament, that this Messiah would be from the line of David. And he says it was written by the prophet Micah, and that's who they said. And Micah wrote this somewhere around 600 650 or 675 or so BC was when that was written. And Micah, at that time, Micah was warning the people of Israel's, the southern kingdom of Judah, put it better, of their pending judgment because of their disobedience to God. And he was talking about, that was when they were going to, he said, eventually you'll be restored and a new king will come into place that will treat you good and will be a good king. But he's also had that meaning, but he also then had a meaning about Christ coming, some 700 years later. So the Magi, the wise men have gotten to Jerusalem, gone to, started questioning. Herod calls them in and says, tell me where he's going to be born. Well, he asks the scribes where they're going to be born, and he goes to them and says, well, we'll see what he says next. When Herod now finds out about it, and he's all in an uproar.
Yeah. We're going in chapter 2 here, verse 7 and 8, we see Herod showing himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then later in 16 through 18. Let's look and see what that says. It says, then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him. Then Herod, when he realized that he had been outwitted by the wise men, flew into a rage. He gave orders to massacre all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, in keeping with the time he had learned from the wise men. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be consoled because they are no more. So Herod loved himself, and he loved being king. He loved his kingship. He didn't want anybody else to worship anybody but him.
Nope.
This is all a big, and he must have been pretty transparent about that.
Yeah.
Because the wise men caught on right away.
Yeah.
We're not coming back here, boys.
Yeah.
Said, we're going to go on our way. But he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. But when you carefully search out something, and you're a foreigner in a strange land, here's the king of the land. Why would he tell me to go carefully search him out? He's got all the power in the land, all these soldiers, everything. Why would he have me to go and search for his child? And then come back and tell him. They figured out real quick that his motives were wrong. And look how he asked for it. He summoned them to him in secret.
Yeah.
And so that kind of suggests that he was trying to do something under the table out
He had
of
a plan,
sight.
did he?
Yeah. So the first step was to find out when this new king was born, and then the next step. And by telling him, they more or less set the dates of the massacre, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
But it was not intentional on their part. But he did this in secret too, so others wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah.
They didn't want people out talking about there's a new king coming. There's a new king coming.
He was careful never to call
Yeah.
Jesus or the baby a king.
And then it doesn't tell us when the exact time that the star appeared, but like you said, we know Herod died in 4 BC, and Jesus' birth had to occur before then. So his order to kill all the boys in Bethlehem, 2 years and younger, makes us think that the timing of the Magi coming was within a couple of years of his birth. And so he didn't take a chance, did he? He said 2 years and younger. And in that region, it may have not been that many children, probably why it wasn't recorded elsewhere in history.
Right.
Could have just been 20 or so children. Of course, to the families, that's devastating.
Yeah. Oh, if it's one of them.
Sure.
Yeah, if it's one of your family.
So anyway, we think Jesus' birth may have occurred somewhere around 6 BC. And we don't really know. So when we thoroughly inquire and question, he said, search carefully. That emphasizes that these magi had better be accurate when they come back.
Phil, it reminds me of what Judy and I did yesterday. We had our Christmas Tuesday night. And before one of our grandchildren got home Tuesday night, they had already called us and said, I think I threw something away.
Yeah.
I think it might be in the
You
garbage.
saved the bag though, haven't you?
Well, I said, well, you come back the next day to help us look, but then I realized that one couldn't come back the next day, and you know why. So we got our garbage bag out yesterday morning, and sure enough, we found it. But we didn't, when we started going through that garbage bag, we didn't just half look at something. We made sure that every piece of paper we picked up and put in another pile was thoroughly looked at. We looked at it carefully. We didn't
Yeah.
want to go back through it and do it again. Just thought we might have missed it.
Yeah.
So that, he told them, turn over every stone you have to have.
And that's us. We got that big old bag of wrapping paper there.
And you don't want to go through it twice.
We've learned over the years that there's always a callback.
Yep, sure is.
And here Pilate's saying, I want y'all to report back to me.
Yeah, let me know what you find.
There again, he's got all the power in Israel, all the power in Judea. Why in the world would he need strangers to come back and tell him? They figured out real quick, this is not something that they wanted to be a part of, and they outwitted him by finding another way back. So, after finding the baby, they were warned in a dream, actually, that not to return to Herod. What happened to the others that brought bad news to Herod?
It didn't
A
last
lot of
very long.
times they were put to death.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're gonna bring me bad news,
So-
I'll just kill you.
When he realized he'd been outwitted, he went nuts. And do you think that was worshipped by the Magi when they said, we're not going to give him a chance to do harm to this child? They're taking a risk upon themselves by going back in this other
And there's not
route.
many ways they can go without getting close to Jerusalem.
No.
And with the group of people that they were traveling with, it's almost like they had to go. I don't know how they could have gone. They might have gone. I don't know, but it was not. They took some risks by not going back to seeing King Herod.
Yeah.
They didn't have any army with them. They couldn't have done anything to stop whatever Herod wanted to do to him. He could.
He was so insecure in his skin. And, well, we know that he flew into a rage,
Yeah.
and then he ordered the death of all these kids,
Yeah.
2 years and younger.
Yeah.
Not concerned with how many it was or questioning families or anything. Just go in and kill them all,
Yeah.
2 years and younger, and we'll get them that way. And like I said, it could have been fewer than 20, but the historians didn't record it.
That's so similar to when Saddam Hussein was in power and his sons Uday and I can never remember the other one's name.
Kuz?
Maybe, but they killed hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Anybody
that protested.
anybody did anything against them, they just had them killed, and it sounds just exactly like it.
This, this fulfilled prophecy of Jeremiah. When this happened, the prophecy wasn't written so that it would happen. it was written to identify that time. The events happened because Herod was insecure and didn't want anything coming of it. It talks about Rachel and Ramah. This was in the northern area, north of Bethlehem, and evidently where some of this occurred, and that was where Rachel was buried. And so in the scriptures that were in Jeremiah, it talked about how that was a prophecy of the Messiah, of him. And then there's others that point to that prophecy, the same prophecy, as occurring when Babylon overtook them.
Right.
And they carted
Started
people
that
off
journey
through
north
there,
and around to
through
the
Ramah,
east.
right.
Mm-hmm.
But we really don't know. But we do know that Rachel was buried there, and that when they talk about Rachel, they're talking about all the mothers there in
Right.
that region. Rachel being the son, having the son Joseph, and him being sold into slavery, and she had been through this
She lost him.
drama and everything before, and talked about how she wouldn't be silenced, weeping for her children, refusing to be consoled. And Jay, you and I both stood there and with people who have lost their children. And there's nothing you can say.
No.
Nothing that you can do to console them. There's nothing. It just takes God and time.
Exactly
And,
right.
It's a sad thing. And in the next verses, we see Jesus' rule should lead us to worship him.
Yeah. We're going to look back at verses 9 through 11 to see the reaction of the wise men when they actually found Jesus when they got to the Bethlehem.
We're going backwards.
We're going
forwards,
backwards a few
aren't we?
verses. As Matthew says, after hearing the king, this is after the wise men heard King Herod, they went on their way to Bethlehem. And there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It had led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures, presenting him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Phil, when they got to Jerusalem and they found out that their journey might be about over, because they were told then that it was supposed to have been born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem was 5 miles away. Phil, first I thought about how could I relate that to today. I thought it's like me heading off to see the Ohio River in Louisville, and when I get close enough to Louisville that I can see the far edge of the bank, and somebody says, there it is, I'd feel like I was there, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
But then I also thought, well, maybe it was a lot further than that, so maybe it was like me walking to Yosemite, to Yellowstone to see Old Faithful. And as I come up over this last hill, I see these guys are going up in the sky. I think, man, I've made it. I'm there. That's the kind of joy I think they had when they got to Jerusalem after traveling hundreds of miles and several months.
That's a long, arduous trip.
And
By
it's
camel
hot and
or
dry.
donkey
It
or
doesn't matter
whatever-
how it is.
Whatever method they used.
It's hot in the car, Phil. I've been through part of it. It's hot in the car, but they must have
and
joy.
And you say you had to go back up and around and down.
Yeah.
You can't drive across there today
No, you can't do it
because of the
Absolutely not.
scorching heat of that desert.
So it says, the verses say, after hearing King Herod, they went on their way, because they knew they were about there, and I'm sure they were full of joy even at that point in time. They saw the star once again. It had been guiding them that whole period, and it stopped above the house where the baby and Mary lived. Just like when the shepherds were guided to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, the star stopped over where Jesus was born, in the manger he was in. They were overwhelmed with joy. And the presence of the star that was there told them, you've arrived, he is here. They didn't have to look any further, didn't have to wonder, well, is this a wild goose chase I'm on? They knew then that they had arrived at where they were supposed to be. And they entered the house. Now, we know that Mary and Joseph were still in Nazareth, obviously, or still in Bethlehem, with Jesus. We think he was probably around a year old, between a year and 2 years old, somewhere 6 months and 2 years, whatever. They hadn't gone back to Bethlehem. Hadn't gone back to Nazareth. We don't know why. Probably God led them to stay there.
That makes me think that it was, it was close in there to the time when that census was being taken.
It was, yeah.
And of course, for a few weeks after that, Mary's not going to feel like traveling back.
No. Well, the writer talks about it. Maybe it could have been a relative. Well, and he was kin, obviously. He was kin to some people from Bethlehem because he was from the line of David. But we don't know if it was relative or not. A lot of times those folks, a lot of them went to Bethlehem, to Babylon, as I said earlier, and were taken there as refugees, settled down and stayed there. Opened up, started businesses, started their family, and
To be slaves, they had a lot of freedom.
yeah, exactly. And we don't know what caused them to stay there, but they chose to stay for at least 2 years, around 2 years, and they were still there. And then the wise men saw the child, and what did they do immediately? They fell to their knees and worshipped him. And we don't know what kind of, once again, it's the same word for worship that was used in the other one, but it almost sounds like it's more than showing respect. It was worshiping him for who he was.
There had to be something about the child.
Yeah.
To make a grown man, a visitor from another country. I mean, he would come in and they would do this. They would bring gifts and they would bow down and worship and that type. But it says they fell down.
Fell down. Laying on the floor, face down, as you've talked about several times, when you get into certain situations in your life, you can't do anything other than just fall down and call on
I
God.
don't know, something about him just set them, made them look at him differently.
Yeah. We don't feel that emotion, and probably because Phil, a lot of times we worship every Sunday, and it becomes a habit, maybe sometimes, but it should never be a habit when we're in the presence of God. And of course, as you said, we're always in the presence of God. We can always worship God. You can worship God as well or better sometimes when you're by yourself than you do when you're in a crowd. You're not inhibited in the things you say and so forth and the thoughts that you have. But gosh, what if we had that feeling every time we came in his presence?
Yeah.
It would be wonderful. And they felt something different. They felt something they'd never felt before. They had never done anything like this in their life, never been called by anything to do this, but God called them to come there and point out where Jesus was born.
And like Jake said in his sermon the other night, we lose our sense of awe. We lose our sense of wonder at things. And if we go back and read those scriptures, maybe not here, but in Luke 2, we see that there was awe. Yeah. Those shepherds, they were awestruck.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, when they come in and they fall down, they're awestruck.
They weren't. I'm sure they weren't even struck when they were in front of Herod.
You and I, we've had encounters that we believe were God things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And don't you feel awestruck when something like that happens? I mean, we can't help but think and feel that way when we're in the presence of God.
We heard about one of them last week in our Sunday school class.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's no doubt that was God intervening in that situation.
Hair stand up on the back of my neck. I don't know.
And it wasn't neither one of us, but it was somebody in our class. And it was God. It was God saying, you need to be right here, right now, at this point in time. And in this case, the person said, yes, I will.
Yeah.
And he was blessed from it. he blessed the person that he was talking to got blessed, and the whole Sunday school class got blessed
That's
because
right.
of what he did for that pretty long period of time. But we don't. Sometimes we miss those, Phil,
Yeah.
and we don't need to miss them. We need to be available and ready when God wants us to put us into one of those situations. Well, once they were worshiping, we don't know how long that was. We don't know how long they were there. They brought him treasure, gave him treasures, and that was very common for someone going to visit a king or especially a king from one country going to visit another one would take things with him, treasures to show what their country had as far as gold, silver, and all those things. They took gold, which we know is still the most valuable mineral in the world. The frankincense and the myrrh, they were resins or gum really from trees in that area, a little bit further south than that, and they were used for anointing kings. They were used for ceremonial odors.
Yeah.
They were used for anointing bodies.
Well,
Very valuable
yeah.
items. Now, I didn't read it in here, but the writer in my Bible, the study guide in my Bible says that they probably used this to finance their trip that they had to take to Egypt. And the reason we know they went to Egypt, verses 13 through 15, which we haven't read, that's the only ones we haven't read up through 18 or 19, I guess, was when God told Joseph to take the baby and his mother and go to Egypt because Herod was going to kill all the babies in that area that were born in the last 2 years. And to go to Egypt and stay until I tell you to come back. And that's what we know that Joseph did. They went to Egypt and stayed until Herod died.
Until Herod died.
Which was in probably a couple of years. Around in there.
That makes you think too that it's right around that,
Yeah.
a 2-year period
Yeah.
there. That,
Yeah. And he died in 4 BC, and then they didn't come back to Bethlehem. They came back and went to Nazareth. Two prophecies filled there. One was that Jesus would come out of Egypt, which is, we know he actually came from Egypt back up to Nazareth. And 2, that he would go back to his hometown and his home people wouldn't receive him.
Yeah.
So all those things were tied into those Old Testament prophecies from hundreds of years before. But we don't know how long they were there, Phil. I hope they got to stay a little while and rest up from that. And like I said earlier, to get back was probably harder than get there because they had to travel a further distance, had to make sure they stayed away from Jerusalem. We don't know what route they took to go back, but it wasn't easy. But yet they went there to do what this urging told him to do, and that was worship the child. We worship our grandchildren, kid, but we don't fall down on the ground and bow down to them, do we?
No.
But that's what they did to this baby. And we wasn't in a manger. He was up running around. He was already snotty nosed by that time and getting into things. And the writer wraps it up kind of like this. He says the wise men weren't tricked by Herod. They hadn't come to worship Herod. They had come to worship the King of Kings. And they found him at a place where the star stopped, just like the shepherds found him when they went looking for him. When they saw the child, they gave him gifts worthy of a king and worshipped him. Jesus was no ordinary child. He was and is a creator, ruler, sustainer, and king over everything. We too should worship him with our lives, our voices, our times, and our treasures. He doesn't only want our treasures, he wants our time. He wants our voices. He wants our lives to be turned over to him.
Do we really understand the connection between using our spiritual gifts and how that translates into worshiping God?
I'm sure we do.
I mean, I think if we did, we would do it more. We'd use it more, or try to exercise them more.
Yeah.
So what we do with this study, look at your calendar, review your priorities. If you have something as a roadblock to your worship, to the time that you can set aside and individually worship. Maybe that we need to rearrange some things and carve out some time that you can worship. You can best worship God and look at every facet of your life as you're doing it. And commit to do it daily. Meet with God each morning. Give your whole heart to Him. Ask Him for help to lay down those things that get in the way, and He will help you. And then when you make that commitment, have somebody that helps you be accountable. I think good friends, Christian friends, it's important about keeping ourselves on track and moving in that sanctification process.
I like that, we talk about our time a whole lot, but your checkbook tells you a whole lot too, where your priorities are. I mean, they just do, it just does.
Well, it gets down to it. Only Jesus is worthy of our worship.
Yeah.
He changes the way we think, where we go, and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And, worship's not just about going to church. It's about living our life for Him.
I feel sorry for the wise men, but they did exactly what God wanted them to do, but it was not easy. We know it was a year and a half out of their life, but they did exactly what God, and I'm sure at the time that they did, it didn't bother them at all, because what they were doing was what God wanted them to do.
And then when they returned, that was
Yeah.
arduous journey all
Yeah.
the way back.
That's what I say.
Yeah. Well, hope you enjoyed our study this evening, and next week we will be looking at some more passages in Matthew, 24th chapter.
I think we're gonna look forward to Christ coming again, I believe is what
Well,
it's telling us,
that's
we'll see.
I think that's what it's looking at.
Yep.
Thanks for watching.